Of course, we do pesticide research. We do everything at the station. And it's a pleasure being down here, seeing all the wonderful people, South Shore. And today, I'm going to follow up Dr. Joe with talking about different palm varieties and characteristics. So we got a lot of the botany and the growing points covered. We're going to talk a lot about landscape elements and some of the ways we might approach palms from composition points and then management and selection. So first question is, why palms? Why do we put palms in the landscape? Because they're cool, exactly. That's reason enough for me. But they're cool because when I see them, I get that tropical kind of atmosphere. I really feel comfortable. I feel like I could relax out by the water, and it creates that little oasis even in an urban area. Such as this area where we got a pool, we got a nice hammock, and we're surrounded by palms. Does anyone know which kind of palm that is? Okay. You're right. It is absolutely. So a lot of people say, okay, it's just a palm, cool. They don't think about that much. We always deal with, for all kinds of trees, plant blindness. It's a tree, and people leave it at that. Palms, certainly, there's a lot of varieties out there and a lot of different things we can think about. So that is a windmill palm. So windmill palm, we got decent size, decent height. It's casting a little shade, but it's also maintaining that visibility. It's not like a live oak that is sprawling and really blocking out things. You got height, and then you've got that shade there. And we notice that kind of fan-shaped leaves, right? Those palmate leaves. So instantly we're taking stock of features like that. But it's not just about the leaves. Of course, as Dr. Joe mentioned, there's other features of interest. This is, again, windmill palm, and about 2 months ago, really, I was seeing it. A lot of those nice yellow flowers under it, so we get other kinds of features out of palms. It's not just from a distance, it looks cool. This is that same palm that we saw in the first image. These fruits are pictures taken about a week or two ago, so they're still kind of, bluish, whitish, gray, and then they're going to continue to change color, but really neat kind of fruit with that. And we still see its palmate, and we're taking closer looks at some of the morphology of that. We touched upon morphology in the last presentation, but key thing is we're looking for all little kinds of clues and differences between these species. What's something else about windmill palms that really sticks out? The hairy bark. The hairy bark, absolutely. So this is a defining feature, certainly of windmill palms, especially when they're more juvenile. So we're really thinking about all the different little features that palms can have. So certainly the hairy bark is important. Where do we see palms oftentimes? Not just around pools creating these kind of tropical atmospheres. We see them a lot of times in public spaces, and what makes palms really neat is that you give a lot of structure to the landscape. So when we think about landscape designs, landscape compositions, we think of line, form, color, and texture. Well, we got very straight lines with these palms. Now, not all palms. We're going to see that later. But you got nice height here. It's creating that kind of natural wall, but you also maintain good visibility. When you're driving around, do you really want to be ducking around every corner, hoping that you're not going to hit something? No, you want visibility, but it gives it a lot of nice structure to it. What about some of these crosshatches? That adds a little bit more interest and a little bit more excitement to the landscape. So a lot of different features there. We look at this. Remember we talked about the 3 to 9? Well, this is more 2 to 10 or so, but we see that the palmate leaves, they're creating this kind of nice little unique feature with that. So that's something to keep in mind. But we can juxtapose that with the more feathered, the pinnate type leaves, where it's more cascading. So from a distance, even in the back, we can see that visually this palm is a lot different than this palm. So when we're thinking about palms, we're not just saying, we're a little bit better than just saying it's a palm. We can find little clues that we can really help tease apart which kind of palms we have. Who recognizes where this image is from? I know my Audubon folks recognize that. We had a great tour there last year, so some of these images you're going to see from there. I got other images from throughout the years in New Orleans littered throughout this, as well as some on the North Shore. So we talk about some of those feather type palms here. Now, what's the biggest difference between this side and this side? Height, absolutely. But we see both have that pinnate kind of morphology. So obviously we know these are not windmill palms. We know they're not sable palms. So even from a distance, we don't have to have the exact answer, but we can whittle it down ever so slightly and think about the different uses in this. Again, nice strong line there, and it creates kind of that cover, that little wall and ceiling, especially as you're looking out. Whereas here, this is a smaller, more intimate area. We're picking a plant that's going to fit into that smaller area. Palms, non-palms, what's the most important thing about plants when we're selecting plants? Right plant, right place. So just always keep that in mind. The rules don't change with that with palms, even though a lot of the ways that we manage them, grow them, etc., are quite different than a lot of other trees. So some other images to think about right here. Is this a pinnate leaf or is that palmate? Pinnate, right. What about this? Palmate, right? Vastly different sizes, vastly different uses. This is going to cast some pretty good shade there, create that nice element. This is in a small little container arrangement, just a small area. So we've got palms for all different kinds of sites, all different kinds of conditions, and how it contributes to the landscape can be quite variable. We're going to come back to this image later. I'm not going to give away where I want to go with that quite yet. Who recognizes this palm? Sago palm. Exactly. Sagos are not a palm. So what are sagos? Cycads, right. So cycads, very, very ancient. Allegedly, the dinosaurs used to eat them. So what are some differences between cycads and palms? What's one of the biggest differences? Because they look pretty similar. So how do palms reproduce? Palms reproduce by flowers. So we talked about the flowers with that either. So flowers, angiosperms, right? Cycads, these are gymnosperms. They're going to reproduce by cones. So just based on that, there's a big difference between it. But remember, sagos are not a palm. Granted, we treat them awfully like that, but sagos are not a palm. Just had to emphasize that. Now, some of our palms are going to be native. Some of them are going to be pretty close. Some of them are going to be from quite far away. So in a natural woodland area, what kind of palms might we see? Palmettos, right? Dwarf palmettos. And this is in nature, we're going to see this as a nice understory kind of plant that's going to do well in some of these shady conditions. But we can also take some of these concepts and put them into the landscape where we're actually manicuring it and add some low-growing, shade-tolerant type of palms as understory trees. And they contribute a lot to the landscape, particularly with texture. So when we say texture in landscape compositions, what do we mean? We mean both the visual and the physical touch. And visual, we think of big, coarse leaves versus small, little, fine leaves that there's tons of them. Now, a palm, those leaves are pretty big, right? They can be several feet across. And then we juxtapose that with other kind of plants that have very small, tiny leaves. So when we say coarse texture, we mean larger leaves. And really creates some nice components in the landscape. So we think about shade for there. Now there's a lot of varieties of palms, especially that you're going to see on the South Shore. And Dan Gill and a lot of other people put out some really good information over the years. So quite a bit of this is going to be adapted from some of his insights. That QR code will take you to some of that information. That's a good resource to check in on, but I'm going to synopsize quite a bit of that. So when we think about the popular palms in South Louisiana, we're going to think about palmate palms. We're going to think about things like palmettos, needle palms, fan palms. We're also going to think about pinnate palms, queen palms, date palms, bamboo palms. Remember, there's also costa palmate palms as well. And then remember, not quite palms, cycads, but oftentimes we do treat those in similar ways to the landscape. So you've seen some of these images before. So when we think about leaf morphology, that's one of the first things that we can really use to really whittle down which palms we're dealing with. So palmate leaf, like palms, kind of like that's fan palms, and the leaflets are going to radiate from a single point of the petiole. So it's going to radiate out like that. Contrast that with pinnate leaves, which are more of the feather-like leaves, and then it's got the rachis, which is like an expansion of the petiole, and then the leaflets grow out perpendicular from that. So feather leaves versus palm leaves. But remember, we've also got costopalmate leaves, and this is somewhere between pinnate and palmate, and it's attached at the costa. So that's like a slight extension of the petiole. So pretty easily we can tell pinnate versus palmate or costopalmate. And then if we're looking at the difference between palmate and costopalmate, it's that little extension, that costa, that's going to be a defining feature. So just keep these things in mind. So when we think about palmate, we're thinking really the fan palms, things like that, and the leaflets are joined laterally, and they're originating from that single petiole tip. So they're radiating around this one single location. Examples of that, like the first image we saw, windmill palm. Mexican fan palm is an example of that. Then we see the feather type leaves. Those are our pinnates, right? And the leaflets are entirely separated from each other. So there's gaps between them. They're not all radiating from that one single location. And they're attached perpendicular to the rachis. So you see where that's not directly perpendicular, you've got variations in the angle. You're much more perpendicular with this. Examples of that would be your queen and your date palms. And then costopalmate. So remember, this is somewhere between it, and the costa is your defining feature of that. It's extension of the petiole into the leaf blade. So a lot of your sable species are going to be costopalmate. So if you were to look between something that's palmate, like a windmill palm, or something that's costopalmate, like a cabbage palm, what would you be looking for to differentiate between that? The costa, exactly. So even from a distance, you've already got one clue that you can work towards when you're identifying them. So just a quick image. Who wants to tell me what kind this would be? What, pinnate, palmate? Pinnate? Why do you say it's pinnate?
The individual leaflets are opposite and separated along
the rachis. Exactly. And that's perpendicular to that, so you got the separate little leaflets. So from a distance, that's pretty apparent, but also up close, that's certainly apparent. So that's a Canary Island date palm, so we really look at that feather-like form of it. So again, we've got the little leaflets growing perpendicular to it. This is our rachis right here, and then the leaflets are growing right off of that. What about this? Who knows what this is? We saw this image already. So this is a windmill palm. So we said windmill palms are going to be palmate, right? So they're originating from that one point and they're radiating out. Now, if we were trying to see if this is a windmill palm or a sable, what would we be looking for? That costa, right? There's no costa on this, so it's a windmill palm. But we can look at other clues. You look at the trunk, what are you going to see on that? The hairy stuff, right? So this is some of the little things that we can tease out and get a better idea from that. And then just seeing this little spot here, how it's all radiating out. Do you see that costa? You don't, right? So this is some of the ways that we can really take that up close look. A slight costa right here. So this would be a costopalmate leaf. You've got this kind of protrusion there, that costa. So we got a palmetto there. That is a feature that can help ID that. So looking at some other things, just from a distance, revisiting these images, instantly we know this is pinnate leaf. Instantly we know this is either palmate or costopalmate, but we just look for the costa. Now, even with tall trees, we can go up close to a dwarf palmetto, we can go up close to a low-growing palm, but from a distance, we can still easily see the difference. We see nice palmate, and then we see pinnate right there. What are some other features that you see, particularly on this left side? those cross hatchings. So some of those leaf bases, you see some people call them boots, some people call them booths. So that is a feature that can certainly be ornamental. How many people like seeing them? How many people don't like seeing them? Right? So it depends. A lot of different opinions, and whoever you're planting for, that's the right answer. But there's different things to consider with that. We're going to touch more on some of those booths as well. But from a far distance, we can instantly say that these two are completely different, even though we're using them in similar ways. We're looking for height in that. Something like this. We see some kind of palmate leaves. Could be coast palmate, could be palmate, but we know it's not pinnate. This palm, is this pinnate? Trick question. It's a sago, right? So think about some of these features and be able to see it. And remember, if you've got a location that you're going to put something like a sago palm, think about choosing an actual palm that you can still get that manageable size and some of that more smaller, interesting habit towards it. There's several reasons why I don't really advocate for putting sago palms, but I'm going to save that for later. So dwarf palmetto, so sable minor. So we got a lot of sables out there. Dwarf palmetto is native to Louisiana. So how many people out here like doing a lot of native gardening? How many of you have clients that really want natives? So if they want some of that palm look and they want natives, dwarf palmetto is going to do really well. That's going to maintain pretty good size. That shrub form, maybe 6 to 8 feet tall. And then the fan-shaped leaves are 1 to 3 feet wide. So you got pretty coarse. You got pretty good size with that. Now the flowers are going to happen in early summer, and that's going to lead to small black fruit. And remember, when we look at plants in their native environment, and we see this as an understory tree, what's that going to suggest is a good condition for it? Shade, right? So a little bit of shade is going to be beneficial. And certainly you could plant that under large trees, but also particular in urban environments where we're going to have different sun patterns and different shading impacts from structures surrounding us. Shade is probably something we're going to have to deal with quite a lot. So think about that as an option. This is some images from Fairside Park. So you just see this right near a wet area as a nice understory tree. So dwarf palmettos are going to do well in some moist soils as well. So just some things to think about for the different conditions. So it's native, maintains a good size, does well in shade, and it'll do pretty well in some of those moist conditions. You see it all the time on the side of riverbanks and things like that. So if it grows well in that area naturally, we're inclined to think it's going to grow well in those situations that we construct. So we like sables. We like those nice kind of fan-shaped leaves. And we want to see that maybe in a little bit more elevated state. That's where cabbage palms or sable palmettos come into play. So we see this very, very commonly. Certainly on my drive-in, they're all over the place. What are some of the big features that we really think of when we see sable palmettos? Those cross hatchings, absolutely, really, really big defining feature in that. Now, cabbage palms, those are native to Florida, and UF's got a lot of really good resources on palms as well. But sable palmettos are naturalized in parts of Louisiana. Lake Charles, I believe, has got pretty good amount of naturalized. But certainly, we look around, and that's a plant that's going to do very well in our environment, and it gives us a little bit more heat, or more height. So it's typically, you're going to see that around 20 to 30 feet tall, but in conditions, some Florida conditions, you're going to see that touch 90. So certainly a variation in size. Variation is a very, very key thing to think about when we're talking about cabbage palms. So those trunks, those crisscrossing patterns, those old leaf bases. So that's really a defining feature. Now, a lot of times in New Orleans, according to Dan, a lot of them are going to have more smooth, thin trunks, about less than 1 foot in diameter. But that's, of course, not always the case. So sometimes it's going to be smooth, sometimes it's going to be fully rough, and a lot of times we got intermediates where it's shaved off until it gets to a certain point. Other features, so fan-shaped leaves, 3 to 6 feet across in length. And remember, in the last image, we said dwarf palmetto 1 to 3 feet in width. So obviously the height and the size is something that's going to be a giveaway, but we can really look at the overall size. Even though they look similar leaves, 6 feet versus 3 feet is quite a difference. Other things that we look at. So of course, the overall leaf is attached with a petiole. So the length of the petiole is also something that we can hone in on. And for a sable palmetto, the petiole may indeed be longer than the leaves. So cabbage palm, other things that we know about them are they're going to be adaptive to wet, poorly drained soils. Does that sound pretty on point for New Orleans? I'd say so. So no wonder it does pretty well. So just think about that. When we're picking right plant for the right place, just keep these things in mind. And we're looking for costa, right? Palmate versus costa palmate. We're looking for that defining feature. So the costa is going to be a really good indicator. So between windmills and sables, even though from a distance it looks very, very similar, find those little differences that you can hone in on. Texas palmetto. So you can guess where that might be native to. Not terribly far away. It's not native to Louisiana, but pretty close. So it's native to South Texas, Mexico. That can get up to about 60 feet tall, which can make it some of the largest of this genus in South Louisiana. And oftentimes we're going to see a smooth gray trunk, often without the leaf bases. So the leaves are approximately 6 feet long, and the petiole is approximately 6 feet long. So we've just covered 3 straight sables, 3 different types of palmettos, and let's just kind of focus on that again. Dwarf palmetto, small, but also the leaves are going to be small, 1 to 3 feet wide. Cabbage palm, 3 to 6, and then Texas palm, Sable Mexicanum, approximately 6 feet long. So we're already honing in on some small differences for that. Saw palmetto. This is another really interesting plant. What is different about this plant than the previous 3? What was the genus of the previous 3? Sable, right? So saw palmetto is Serenoa repens. Now this is native from South Carolina to Florida to LA. I don't know if it's through LA, but I know it's native in Mississippi. So it's close, right? We can't get right into our zip code, but we can get kind of close. This is also something that's going to be a clumping form, so typically around 3 to 10 feet tall. So very similar, at least in appearance, to our dwarf palmetto. Absolutely. But it's not a sable. This is slow growing, so that's something to keep in mind. But it's also an opportunity for us to explore other kind of features that could be neat with it. So the leaf colors vary from yellow-green to blue-green, so there's some interest there. I think there's also some other uses. I believe they make supplements and such out of it, but I don't know enough about that. I'm not going to comment on it. But you might see that out there. Saw palmettos are interesting. The fruit certainly can also be an interesting feature there. So we think of primarily leaves with palms, but fruit and flower is something else that we can keep in mind. What do you think I'm going with in this image? No costa, exactly. So from a distance, if you were to tell me dwarf palmetto or saw palmetto, what would you think? Your guess is as good as mine. You'd want to zoom in and take a close look and look for that defining feature. Remember, there's no costa here. It's all radiating out from a single point. So we're already sleuthing out little things that we can define this with. Other plants, needle palm. So we got another genus right here. Now this is native from South Carolina to Florida to Mississippi. So again, not right quite in our backyard, but in spitting distance. Shrub-like form. So it's got a shrub-like form often found in clusters. So we've got 3 shrub-like form palms that we've already covered. Dwarf palmetto, and then Serenoa, the saw palmetto. Now we've got needle palm. 6 to 8 feet tall. So some of the defining features, short petioles. We talked about some palms that have petioles up to 6 feet tall, some palms that are going to have very short petioles. So size certainly something to look out for. But also it's covered with dark fibers. So we're looking at little features like that. Fan-shaped leaves up to 4 feet in diameter, and this is going to tolerate some shade. So looking back at some of these smaller kind of palms we're looking at, dwarf palmetto, 1 to 3 feet in width. This is up to 4 feet, and the past one is approximately 3 feet across. So even just for a small palm, we've got a lot of options to play with. Tolerates some shade, so when we think, of course, about the size and where you might see this in a natural element, think about where you'd put that in the landscape. Now it's called needle palm. What might that indicate? So they've got these needles at 6 to 8 inches long or so. So this is something that I wouldn't want to quite fall into. So think about that when you're managing the landscape. So, for example, you've got a client that says, I want a small palm in my landscape. What questions they might ask? They might say, I want one native to Louisiana. Okay, dwarf palmetto. I want something with small leaves, dwarf palmetto. Say they want something with a little bit more blue-green variation, something to mix it up, then you'd look at the Serenoa that we looked at previously. Sometimes you might have a client that says, I got a lot of people walking around my property. I want to have something a little bit more security. Maybe you put a needle palm out there. Probably wouldn't want it if you got kids. Probably not if you got pets. It's just options. It's just things to think about. So be very careful with where you're going to select some of these palms. And remember, you're not locked into just one choice. So we got a lot of options for that. Bamboo palm. This is native to eastern Mexico. And this is really kind of unique. It's kind of feather like leaf palm. It's really unique morphology when we're looking at palms. But leaf morphology isn't the first most important thing we're looking at when it comes to bamboo palms. That would probably be the fruit, which is that orange to red fruit that is really a defining feature. Something else to keep in mind with bamboo palm is that it's multi-trunk and it still maintains that small size, 6 to 8 feet tall. But you got these nice kind of multi-trunk appearance to it that sets it apart. So if you're looking for different kind of variation, that's something to think about. Now we've got our tried and true ones that are really easy to find, that we're confident in seeing a lot. Some of these varieties might be a little bit more difficult to source, but that's what options are here for. What about blue Hesper? So this is certainly not native to our area. This is a California native. And blue Hesper, so what do you think is going to happen? What's a big feature? That blue. So you're getting a nice character in that. So in a natural habitat, blue Hesper is going to reach about 40 feet tall, but in LA, or at least this LA, that's often going to be seen as 8 to 10 feet, so a little bit smaller. Petiole, up to about 3 feet long. So this petiole right here, about 3 feet long. And you might see some white teeth, so some of that outline in it. So you get kind of a cooling blue effect with it, some other kind of features. Now this palmate leaves 3 to 5 feet, so we're looking at options with that. This one might be a little bit difficult to find as well. But certainly it looks nice, and some of that cooling blue adds a unique flavor to the landscape as well. This is where you'd see it in a little bit more taller sizes. You've got variations in the height there. So you'll see that out west. All right, windmill palm, where it all started with, one of the first things we talked about. That is certainly not native, but that's okay. It's actually one of the better palms for Louisiana. Notice I did not say just South Louisiana. So windmill palms, those are going to reach a height of 40 potentially, but in reality, we're not going to see it at 40 feet. Where are we typically going to see it? 10 to 15 feet like we saw in that previous image. So we talked about some really short palms. We talked about some really tall palms. This one is just right. So typically 15 to 20 feet is what you're going to see that in the landscape, 10 feet, etc. Hair-like matting. That's going to coat the trunk, especially when young. That is a really key defining feature. So remember, we talk about things like texture with leaf size and the coarse texture versus fine texture. Remember, texture can also suggest things too when you touch it. Now, you're going to touch that, it's going to be, a different touch than just a smooth bark. It's going to be, fibrous and hairy like that. So visual texture, physical touch texture, something to think about. Fan-shaped leaves, approximately 3 feet in diameter. If we don't know the difference between this and a sable, what are we going to look for? Costa, exactly. So windmill is not going to have a costa. So just things to really kind of beat a dead horse with. For a hardy palm for Louisiana, windmill palms are going to be particularly reliable. So this is something that can even be planted in northern locations of the state. So when we think about palms, especially when we're teaching palms, it's more focused on what's going down here at South Shore, even on the North Shore, etc. We don't really necessarily do big palm talks in Alexandria, Shreveport, Monroe, etc. But a windmill palm is going to do really well for that. Hardy to 15 to 20 degrees, sometimes even less. Now remember, this is slow growing, and it's going to top out at that 15 to 25 foot range most often is where you're going to see that in the landscape. And then, of course, those slender, hairy trunks are going to be a defining feature. For this, you want to avoid poor drainage. You can say that for pretty much every plant, but avoid poor drainage with that. But it does tolerate drought, and it does tolerate some salt. So when you're thinking about where you're going to put these plants, something to keep in mind. So really, of course, in coastal areas, we'll think about salt a lot. But you don't want to put it right in that wet part of the landscape either. So just right plant, right place, and keep those options. Canary Island date palm. Now we're getting into some other varieties. What kind is this? Pinnate or palmate? Pinnate, right? We see that from a long distance. So Canary Island date palm, very large, 50 to 60 feet tall, 15 to 20 foot spread. Pinnate leaves, 10 to 15 feet long. So this is dioecious, so we talked about how some plants have male and female parts. Some plants are either male, some are either female. So that's a dioecious plant. Thick trunk when young, but it reduces as it gets taller. A lot of times you're going to see this with trunks smooth at maturity, and you're going to see those globose orange fruit. Really good street tree, so we see that a lot with height and with that nice kind of cascading branch. Queen palm, again, pinnate or palmate? Pinnate, right? That's the easy part, right? So instantly we know we don't just have to say palms in general. We can get a little bit more specific. We don't always have the answer. We can narrow it down eventually. This is native to South America. You'll see it 25 feet, a lot of times taller than that too. Gray trunk, 1 to 2 foot diameter. And you're going to notice some of those rings, some of those leaf scars. That's a defining feature. So when we think about trunks, we got the hairy trunks of windmills, but we've also got some of those smooth with the rings for queen palms, and those nice gracefully arching leaves as well. Now, cycads, those are not palms, but of course we treat those similarly. Those are dioecious as well. So here's a male sago right here. You see the inflorescence growing up, a cone like that from the top. Have to assume this is a female one there, intentionally placed. But just something to think about. So the difference between cycads, like sagos, and palms is flowers versus cones. So just to beat a dead horse. Reason I don't really like to do sagos are they look good, of course, but they are very toxic to pets. So all parts of the plant are poisonous, especially seeds, fronds, etc., and it can be very fatal. So be very cautious with your pets around them. So you don't want to get messed up on it. So just say no to planting sagos, especially if somebody got a lot of pets. You don't want to deal with that. If you want a small palm, there's plenty of other options that are actually palms. Sable, the stem morphologies. This is a really, really interesting part of it. So you might see these booted sables. I like this. It gives a really nice, coarse, natural texture to it. This is very manicured. Not quite my thing, but who am I to tell you what to do? Booted sables. So those bootjacks, those are remaining leaf bases, and as the old leaves fall, this gives it that spiky look, whereas the slick sables give it very smooth, uniform look. Now, it doesn't have to be everything or nothing. You can leave some of the top part up there, or you could even go half and half. So when you've got it kind of varied like that, that's called a cigar cut, because it looks like the burning end of it a little bit, so there's variation. So that's kind of neat there. Other variations with sables. How many people have seen curved sables before? Really, really interesting. So the trunks of those have varying degrees of angles, and they look really nice, kind of overhanging pools and other kind of features like that. And the angle can actually also be artificially created. If you plant it at an angle, as the plant grows out, it's going to be searching for light, and it's going to give that kind of gentle upward curve and give it some unique looks to it. I can think of several locations in the city that have this unique morphology. We're going to have pictures of that later. Ground runner, Florida sable. This takes it to that next level. So this image really just shows how much it can kind of go horizontally, act kind of like a ground cover in that sense. How about double or triple? How many people see sables that have those kind of split stems? So when it divides into 2 or 3 trunks, it really can add a unique character to the landscape, makes quite a statement, but it's also double the weight. It can be very, very heavy to move. So just think about that. Now the question with booths. So a lot of people ask, what's up with all these booths? So University of Florida had a good answer to that. Somebody asked, why is all this cross-hatching happening and why are some not having it? So there's a large amount of variation with sables. And sables are open pollinated. So what happens when you've got this free flow of genetic material? You get a ton of variation. So naturally, you can get a lot of variation with that. But also, remember, we always got to go fight nature and do things our way. So a lot of times we might just shave them off or do other things. So there's the natural side, the genetic side, and then there's the management side that can affect the booths. So reason 1 is genetics, and then reason 2 is the booths can be manually removed. A lot of times people might do that before transplanting, give that false sense of this is how it is, but really it just depends on what somebody's tastes are. Now the booths have a lot of value as well. So when you see the booths, you've got these little nooks and crannies, these little crevices. That is a great place for biodiversity. So you can have a lot of plants kind of volunteer themselves growing within those booths. That's a good place for birds. That's a good place for all kinds of wildlife to really thrive. Fallen booths are also quite often used in kind of art pieces there. So this is a fallen booth. I think they got a spider plant growing in there. So it creates a little nice statement with that, especially as they fall off naturally. So just think about that whenever you're dealing with booths of a sable. So when you're looking at this from a landscape perspective, creative compositions, I don't say design, I say creative compositions, you're going to always ask the right question. Remember, right plant, right place. So what's some of the things we keep in mind? Space, absolutely. Think about light requirements. So cabbage palm versus a dwarf palmetto, you're going to have different kinds of light requirements. Soil requirements. We talked about how cabbage palms do well in compacted, wet soils, whereas windmill palms not really good in wet soils. So think about that. Availability. I mentioned some of these varieties are going to be easy to find. Some of them not so much. So keep that in mind. Native to where? So whenever people talk natives, always say native to where. Some people want it within their exact native, within their exact zip code. Some people say state. Some people say region. Some people say continent. The goalposts are always sliding. So you can get native to Louisiana. You can get native to Gulf Coast. You can get native to the world. So it depends on what your goal is there. Defining features. Size certainly is a big one. Foliage, palmate versus pinnate, costa palmate. Even though we can't really see costa palmate versus palmate from a distance, think about that. Flowers or fruit. So the flowers can certainly be appreciable. The fruit can be a defining feature for some of them as well. Remember that especially if you're choosing dioecious plants. If you want fruit on a dioecious plant, you got to hope you have a female plant. So that's just something to think about. Certainly the trunk as well. And then remember what the purpose is in the landscape. So if you've got a lot of pets, you're not going to put a sago in. If you got little kids running around, you're not going to put the needle palm in. Think about that. But also think about line, form, color, and texture. So a few things with this. So the texture, of course, we've seen these images before, but you want to take these natural growing locations and implement that into your landscape. So understory, small dwarf palmetto, going to be nice understory in the landscape as well. What it really adds is it takes up space, but it's not so fine. You can see from a distance those coarse leaves. It doesn't necessarily beg you to come up closer and take a closer look to it. Fills in space, adds that coarse texture, and is a good plant for that location. Who recognizes where this might be? Surface lot at MSY. So if you park at MSY and you're walking in, you're going to see these trees out here. Now, what tree is this? What palm tree is that? It's a cabbage palm, right? And we know it's a cabbage palm because instantly, is that feather leaf or is that palmate? Palmate. Palmate or coast palmate, we don't know yet, but we know it's not pinnate. So we've already narrowed it down. What else do we see? Those booths, right? And it's kind of that cigar cut booths, so it's adding some unique character towards it. I like this a lot because it's nice and smooth, but it also has a little character as well, so something to think about there. Now, if we were to just look at the leaves, these leaves and these leaves, looks pretty much the same. Certainly from a distance, it looks the same. But that's why we look at up close. But if we can't look up close, we look at other features, hairy trunks versus non-hairy trunks. Things to keep in mind. Other things, windmill palm, this is probably about 12 to 15 feet tall. This is probably about 25 to 30 feet tall, so we're instantly narrowing things down a little bit. That's a shame that that image didn't load completely, but we've got some low-growing palms right here, some kind of dwarf palmetto there. And then for the part of this image we can see, what do we see here? Very prominent booths. And we see those palmates up there, so that stands out. So here's the image of it all together. You've got some nice low growing, and then you've also got the cabbage palm there with the booths up top. So it creates a little bit of dynamics in a small site. Forget where this is exactly, but I took this 2 years ago, and about this time, somewhere here in the city. Container arrangements, other things that we can look at. So remember, we talk about coarse leaf texture, big leaves, kind of, very dominant look to that. What about this plant? Right? We got asparagus fern, foxtail. Very kind of fine look to it. And that contrasts very well with the more spiky look of this dwarf palmetto right here. We've got sharp, kind of pointy leaflets growing off, and then we've got nice rounded, this might be Baptisia, I can't tell for sure. But you've got rounded leaves versus the more spiky leaves. So when you're looking at different kind of visual textures to the landscape, even in a small area, palms can pack a punch. Certainly for height, these are some other things that we can keep in mind. We want something that's going to maintain visibility. When we talk about landscape design elements, line, we've got lines of walkways. And when we're designing landscapes, we want to funnel people through. A straight line gets people from point A to point B ASAP. When you want people to meander and kind of enjoy themselves, you got a nice curvy line. In a case like this, you're creating a hallway. A natural hallway, you're going to want straight up trunks, and you want that height to create that kind of alleyway and frame the entire site. You may want pinnate leaves because they create that nice kind of cascading look. This might be a jelly palm. I'm not entirely sure. I got to go check it back out again. But nonetheless, it's pinnate. It's small, and it manages within that really small area. And it's not really about casting that framing of the building. It's really to serve as the focal point of the landscape there. Finish it off. Who recognizes where this might be? Right, so this is right in the French Cordon. What do we have here? What's that? So we've got these other kinds of features, and we've got that with these nice multi-trunk look to it that really creates a unique look to the landscape. So a lot of good information out there. Of course, I referenced some of the work that Dan and Severn Dowdy, Alan, a lot of folks put together over the years. UF's got a lot of good stuff as well. So just for some continuing information, something to check out. If you'd like to ever reach out to me, I know most, if not all of y'all, you probably already have my contact information, but if you don't, that's my email. And of course, you can always get my contact from any of our wonderful South Shore agents. Y'all are in the industry. So at the Hammond Station, we have our annual field day. It is always the third Friday in July, which happens to be July 18th this year. Yes, it's hellaciously hot, but y'all are already on South Shore, so you're fine. But our gardens look really good then. Trial gardens are in full force, a lot of research there, so definitely save the date. It's a free event. If you got any questions about that, you can always reach out to me and register, but love to see you there. And with that, any questions, I'm happy to answer them if I've got time for one or two.
Have you noticed a problem with female palms and leaf lines?
So I don't know enough about that to necessarily speak on it. I know with diseases, we got the expert, Dr. Singh, here, so I would ask him that. All right. Well, thank you all, and hopefully it gave you something to chew on.